Barakatah Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahushai, Ba'ashem Rachakodash. Welcome to another live lesson. The name of this one is The Stranger That Can Eat the Passover. Now there's a big controversy with this word stranger and what it means. Well, Lord's willing, this lesson, we're going to get into it and show you that the stranger that could eat the Passover is talking about an Israelite foreigner. And even, back when we had the land of Israel, you still had Israelites that were considered strangers to particular inheritances, that belonged to other tribes. Because remember, when Israel would keep the Passover, you had Israelites coming from all over the place. And knows where we're going to get to that scripture too, but I was listening to Exodus the 12th chapter, and I didn't really get that far into it because there was something that piqued my interest through the Spirit. So I wanted to touch on that, and go into that particular word stranger. Now, when we read the book of Exodus the 12th chapter, Exodus the 12th chapter is pretty much the chapter that explains in detail of what is to be done on the Passover or for the Passover. Now, we know that we can't keep the law perfect. A majority of brothers don't have farms. You may have some brothers that have a farm that can do certain things like this, but we're pretty much under grace. This is why we're rehearsing the righteous acts. So what we do keep though is the ceremony of the Passover. Eat the lamb, the bitter herbs, the wine, the unleavened bread. Those are things that we can still keep. But as far as raising the lamb, it's not something that we can do. Unless, like I said, brothers have those facilities where they can do that. So pretty much, we eat the dinner. Or should I say, we eat the lamb, the bitter herbs, the unleavened bread, and the wine in remembrance of the great sacrifice that Yahushua did for us. Because, although this goes back to the deliverance from Egypt, when we keep the Passover now, we're really keeping the Passover in remembrance of Yahushua, because he became the ultimate sacrifice. He is that lamb, the Lamb of the Most High, as John the Baptist, a man of the Lord, by the way, that was always in the truth, never fell out of the truth. He even said that Yahushua is the Lamb of the Most High that taketh away the sins of the world. And that world is talking about the world of Israel. And that's another controversial word, when it comes to these different plantation Christianity and religious movements out there. So what we're going to do is we're going to read through this. I'm not going to read the whole chapter. We're just going to jump around a little bit. But I'm going to read down until we get to this one particular verse. And we'll go get into it. Exodus 12:1. And by the way, there was some information that came out Thursday, which there was over 27, almost 2,800 people that are quarantined in New York. And if they leave their homes, they could be jailed, they could be fined, and all this stuff that you see going on throughout the world with these different plagues. You see the locusts out there, you see fires, you see, this coronavirus and these other viruses and bacteria, whatever happening around the world. And we're about to celebrate the Passover, tonight. So, a lot of this stuff was happening in Egypt also, ancient Egypt, so it's kind of heavy how things are. The Lord is the ultimate producer, the ultimate director. The way he directs everything is flawless. But let's get into it. Exodus 12:1. And the Lord spake unto Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, and the first Passover we kept was in the land of Egypt. And we were 40 years in the wilderness, and we kept the Passover in the wilderness. You know, it wasn't until later on in the history that Jerusalem was established as the place to keep the Passover. But all before that, we were keeping it in Egypt. We were keeping it in the wilderness, you know, all the way until we were settled in our land, you know, and everything was established. You know, so now we're not settled in our land yet. So this is why we're keeping it here, because you have those that say you're not really keeping the Passover unless you're keeping it in the land of Israel, you know, which we can't do that, you know, bottom line. It says, this month shall be unto you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year to you. Speak ye unto all the congregation of Israel. So this message is to the Israelites. This is not to any other nation, saying, in the 10th day of this month they shall take to them every man a lamb, according to the house of their fathers, a lamb for an house. And if the household be too little for the lamb, let him and his neighbor next unto his house take it according to the number of the souls. Every man according to his eating shall make your count for the lamb. Your lamb shall be without blemish, a male of the first year. You shall take it out of the sheep or from the goats. And there's brothers in Jamaica, I believe it is, that eat goat because they don't have lamb out there. And it's lawful to eat goat or lamb on the Passover. All right. And you shall keep it up until the 14th day of the same month, and the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill it in the evening. So there were particulars that had to be done for the Passover, you know. But like I said, in this time that we're in now, we can't keep it this way. But when you read throughout the scriptures, you see that the Lord is very meticulous, you know, from the way that he set up the tabernacle and, you know, the rites of how to worship the Lord, and different sin offerings and peace offerings, and, you know, different things had to be done a specific way, because the Lord is very meticulous when it comes to keeping his laws, statutes, and commandments. You know, there's always a set way to do it. It says, and they shall take of the blood and strike it on the two side posts and on the upper doorposts of the houses wherein they shall eat it. And if they didn't do this, guess what? They would die. You know, the firstborn in their home would die, which it didn't happen to Israel. It happened to the Egyptians and the Egyptian servants and their cattle and all that. But this is true that if an Israelite didn't do this, their firstborn in their home and their cattle and all that would die. Same thing today. Whoever does not have the blood of Yahushua is going to be destroyed, you know? And that's just the bottom line. It says, and they shall eat it. They shall eat the flesh in that night, roast with fire and unleavened bread, and with bitter herbs they shall eat it. You know, you ain't supposed to, you know, sit there and, you know, like season it up. And, you know, I mean, afterwards, after it's done, if you want to put a little sea salt or whatever on it, some pepper, whatever, you know, you could, but we just eat it like that, you know. We don't really put nothing on it. We just eat it just like that. It has its own taste to it. It says that they shall eat it. Okay, let's just move on. Then they shall eat the flesh in that night, roast with fire and unleavened bread. What we do is we get the round, flat tortillas. You know, if you brothers go and look for these round tortillas, you know, those shells, make sure you read the ingredients that it doesn't say leaven, because some of them, they put leaven in it. So what you got to do is you read the ingredients, and if it doesn't say leaven in it, then you're good to go. And with bitter herbs. The bitter herbs, if you brothers can't find horseradish root, which is a bitter herb, and chop it up and eat pieces of that, if it's to the point where you can't find anything, see if you could find some wasabi paste. And wasabi pretty much is horseradish in the form of a paste, you know, and it is also bitter, you know. That's another alternative. So they shall eat it. It says, eat not of it raw nor sodden at all with water, but roast with fire his head with his legs and with the pertinence thereof. That's how we were supposed to eat it, you know. But now, you know, we go to the store and you have to buy pieces of lamb, you know, in the store and cook them that way. You know, it says, and you shall let nothing of it remain until the morning, and that which remaineth of it until the morning you shall burn with fire, and thus shall you eat it, with your loins girded, your shoes on your feet, and your staff in your hands. You shall eat it in haste, It is the Lord's Passover. So it wasn't a lamb dinner, as you often hear Elder Apostle Tar speak about how these individuals treat the Passover like it's a lamb dinner. It's not a lamb dinner. It was something that was done in haste. Remember, we were escaping from the clutches of Pharaoh. We were escaping captivity, hardcore bondage. So everything was done in haste. And this is why the bread, when it was done, you didn't have time to put no leaven in it. Because when you put leaven into dough, what happens? You got to wait for it to rise, and proof and all of that stuff. So the Lord wanted this thing to be done in haste. So that's why we eat it the way we eat it. We don't sit there and, back in the days we used to have the salad and the eggs and, different things that pretty much some so-called Jews use, in their so-called Passover, but we don't do that. We just have the lamb, the bitter herbs, the unleavened bread, and the wine, and that's it. And that's all that's required. It says, for I will pass through the land of Egypt this night, and will smite all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast, and against the gods of Egypt, which are the rulers of Egypt, I will execute judgment. I am the Lord Yahweh B'Shem Yahushua. And you see the Lord executing judgment right now. He said, I will smite Egypt again with plagues as before. Now, it ain't talking about ancient Egypt. It's talking about the modern day Egypt, which is America, Babylon the Great, Sodom, Egypt, Nineveh, and all of those, Assyria, all of those other names of those different nations that were in power at one time or another. It says, and the blood shall be to you for a token, upon the houses where you are. And when I see the blood, in this case today, be the blood of who? Yahushai. The doorposts being what? Our minds. I will pass over you, and the plague shall not be upon you to destroy you, when I smite the land of Egypt. And that happened. There was a great cry that night, from the Egyptians, because there was not one house where there was not one dead. But among Israel, that didn't happen. And it's going to happen this time again. Not necessarily the firstborn. It doesn't necessarily have to be the same exact plagues. It could be similar to it, or it could be something else. Whatever the Lord deems to bring upon this place, in the form of those plagues. It says, and this day shall be unto you for a memorial, and you shall keep it a feast to the Lord throughout your generations. You shall keep it a feast by an ordinance forever. And this is why, even to this very day, even though we're rehearsing the righteous acts, we still keep the Passover until the Lord established the new Passover, and makes this one not even really mentioned, but it's still going to be in the scripture, so we're still going to know about it. But this new Passover that's coming, so to speak, is going to outshine, the one from Egypt, ancient Egypt. 7 days shall you eat unleavened bread, and when you today's like the last day before the sun goes down. You brothers, sisters out there that have any leaven in your house, get it out your house. You can take it and put it in the trunk of your car or your truck or whatever you have, because brothers ain't got it like that. Just throw stuff out, so you could just take it and throw it in your car or truck or whatever, to get it out of your house. Anything with leaven in it. Even the first day you shall put away leaven out of your houses. For whosoever eateth leavened bread from the first day unto the seventh day, that soul shall be cut off from Israel. And in the first day there shall be an holy convocation, and the seventh day there shall be a holy convocation to you. No manner of work shall be done in them, save that which every man must eat. That only must be done of you. Right, because you could prepare something, but you can't cook. You can't, you have to prepare something to eat, but you can't cook. It's a very high holy day, and this is the same ordinance for the Sabbath also. It says, and you shall observe the feast of unleavened bread, for in this self same day have I brought your armies out of the land of Egypt. Now the feast of unleavened bread starts the same night as the Passover. The Passover was the act of Yahushua passing over the children of Israel, destroying the Egyptians, but that same night you didn't eat leavened bread. So that's the same night that started the feast of unleavened bread, was the night of the Passover. But the night of the Passover, what was even more special about it was that was the night that the Lord passed over our forefathers and went and destroyed the Egyptians' firstborn among them, their servants, and their cattle. And shalom, to all the Akim on the comment board, and if there be any Akwat listening, watching. Therefore shall you observe this day in your generations by an ordinance forever. In the first month, on the 14th day of the month at even, you shall eat unleavened bread, until the 21st day of the month at even. So that's 7 days. So if you start tonight, which is Saturday, the 7th day should be Friday night. You could start eating leaven again. Because you got Saturday, right? You got Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. So Friday night at evening, you should be able to eat leaven again. All right, because it's the 7th day ends Friday night. Because Saturday night would be what? The 8th day. All right. So now it says, now this is the point here, the 19th verse. 7 days shall there be no leaven found in your houses, for whosoever eateth that which is leavened, even that soul shall be cut off from the congregation of Israel, whether he be a stranger or born in the land. Now this is the key here. So now somebody would see this word stranger here without any understanding and would be like, well, that's talking about anybody. No, we just read up above where the Lord is speaking to the congregation of Israel. So what does it mean by the stranger? Well, let's go to the origins of the word for stranger. And in this case, the word here is gar. Now, gar just simply means a sojourner. This can apply to anyone that sojourns anywhere. But mainly when we read in the scriptures about the stranger, it normally uses this word for an Israelite foreigner. Now, in some cases, it uses the word nakar, which is another word for stranger. There's a couple of words. There's about 3 or 4 different words for strangers, and majority of them represent the other nations. This one happens to be a sojourner, which is an Israelite foreigner. But sometimes the scriptures do mention Nakaria in the form of being an Israelite that is in that state of mind, because if you have a brother that offends you and you go to him and you try to, mend things up, and he don't want to hear you, and you take him to the witnesses, and he don't want to hear the witnesses, you take him to the congregation, he don't want to hear the congregation, what happens? He gets cast out as what? A heathen man. So at that point, he becomes a stranger. And anytime Israel left from that land, they pretty much became strangers, whether they were yanked out of the land by other nations or whether they left and went to another land. Because now they're strange to what? To their inheritance. They're strange to their land. And this is simply what this means, gar. When we read through here, it says sojourner. Now, what is a sojourner? Somebody that's here for a while and then moves on. A temporary inhabitant. Now, this what we read in here is for future, for the future, because at this time, all Israel was there. Israel was not; they weren't strangers. Even though they were strangers to the land of Egypt, but they had been living there, for 400 years. A temporary inhabitant, a newcomer lacking inherited rights. So it's just like you had an individual that's an Israelite, but he comes to your home. Even though he's an Israelite, in your home, he's still a stranger. That's why he has to ask permission to do certain things. He can't just come up in here, act like that's his house, because it's not. So he's pretty much a stranger in your house, in your home, although he is an Israelite still. And this is pretty much what this is speaking about. Foreigners in Israel, see? What foreigners in Israel? Those Israelite foreigners. Though conceded rights. So what are conceded rights? When we look the word up, concede, it says yielding without necessarily agreeing. So that is like you have Israelites that come from different parts of the world, which we're going to read about it. Right? Why is that? Because let's go Deuteronomy 16:16. 3 times in a year shall all the males appear before the Lord thy power in the place which he shall choose. So now all of these males, right, of Israel did not all live in Jerusalem. They were coming from different lands. And that's why you had the inns, the hotels, and when the hotels were full, you had certain family members or certain other Israelites that would put up, certain of these Israelites that came from different parts of the world back then to come to Jerusalem, these Israelites that came to Jerusalem to keep the Passover. So you had a lot of different Israelites from different regions coming to the land of Israel, to the land of Jerusalem to keep the Passover, according to the law. In the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and in the Feast of Weeks, and in the Feast of Tabernacles, and they shall not appear before the Lord empty. So this is why you had those that were strangers, sojourners, but it was conceded rights, because although they were Israelites, they didn't have a right to those lands, because that wasn't their inheritance. All right. Let's go now to Acts 2:5. Trying to explain it the best way I can so you brothers could follow along. Acts 2:5. And there were dwelling at Jerusalem Jews, devout men out of every nation under heaven. So you had all these different nations out there where Israel was living, and they would leave that place 3 times in a year to come to Jerusalem. So just imagine all those Israelites in Jerusalem. They had to be put up somewhere. Now, the place where they were put up didn't belong to them. So they couldn't act, even though they were Israelites, they couldn't act like that was theirs. So in some cases, you had those that would yield to them, but not necessarily agree. Assent or yield, give consent. There was another one. To acknowledge, often reluctantly, as being true, just, or proper. See? And because you had different Israelites that were coming from different parts of the world. Now let's go to Ecclesiasticus 29 and 21, and this should clear it up a little more. It says the chief thing for life is water and bread. It says and clothing and in house to cover shame. See, and these are the main things for life. As long as you have water, bread, clothing, and a place to cover cover your shame, so you won't be homeless, right? It says better is the life of a poor man in a mean cottage, meaning something that's just regular, common, than the delicate fare in another man's house. And this is the point. When you're in another man's house, even though you're an Israelite, you're still walking on eggshells, because that is not your domain. So you are subject to the person that's there, and depending on how they treat you or how they act, you're still subject to that, as long as you're up under that man's roof. You see? Let me see. Scripture came into mind. I'm trying to. Right. Oh, this is a good one. 1 Peter 4:9. Use hospitality one to another without grudging. Because when you do something, you're supposed to do it out of the kindness of your heart. You ain't supposed to be, I put you up, right? You staying in my house, mother, You ain't supposed to be done, because they're appreciative of being there. Philoxenos, hospitable, generous to guests. But it says what? Without grudging. Because you did have those that did grudge. Grudging, gongusmos, murmuring, muttering. See? That fucking dude, man, staying, So, because in the case of the Passover, it was just temporary. But you had those Israelites that had a problem with that. And this is why these laws were put into effect. Romans 12:13, distributing to the necessity of saints, given to hospitality. Let's go back here. Better is the life of a poor man in a mean cottage than delicate fare in another man's house. Be it little or much, hold thee contented, that thou hear not the reproach of thy house, Why? Because you're there, but that's not your home. You're sojourning there with these people. You're a stranger in that house, although you are an Israelite. And this is what was happening. This is why, after a while, the Jews in Jerusalem had contempt for those outside of Jerusalem. They had contempt against the Hellenistas, which was the Greek-speaking Jews. They had contempt against anyone that came from different lands. You know, but they treated them differently than they would those in their own land. Let's go real quick to Acts chapter 6 and 1. And in those days, when the number of the disciples was multiplied, there arose a murmuring of the Grecians against the Hebrews, because their widows were neglected in the daily ministration. So why do you think they were neglected? So, man, y'all ain't from here. Y'all from over there. You know, we're gonna take care of these people, and if there's anything left, then y'all gonna get something. This is why the Apostle Peter and the rest of the apostles had to stop the ministry, go back and fix this issue, and set up men over that were gonna deal justly. Because Jake, you know how Jake gets down. If you're not from there, then you're treated like an outcast. And that's been the same case with Israel no matter where you go. You know, in Jamaica, they call you foreign. Even though you might be of so-called Jamaican ancestry or West Indian ancestry, you're foreign to them if you weren't born there, if you don't live there. You know, just so you can get an idea. All right, now let's go back. There was another one, but I can't think of it right now. It says, be it little or much, wholly contented that thou hear not the reproach of thy house. Now check it out. For it is a miserable life to go from house to house. For where thou art a stranger, you Israelites, thou darest not open thy mouth. Right? Because at the end of the day, you don't live there. You're staying with them, but you don't have the same rights that they do in there. So when Israel came from different cities and countries, they didn't have the same rights as the Israelites that were in the land of Jerusalem, in the land of Israel. Even after these Israelite foreigners, or these Jews from these different nations, which are Israelites, left and went back to their home, those people that were there naturally was always there. You see? I mean, I'm hoping that, that it's making sense to you, brothers. Thou shalt entertain and feast and have no thanks. Moreover, thou shalt hear bitter words. Oh, this guy, I mean, how long is he going to stay? And it's always, you always have them people that they'll say, yeah, come, but then they'll have a problem with you. They have a problem with you eventually. So this is what is speaking about here in the book of Exodus, the 12th chapter, which we're going to get back to that. It says, come thou stranger and furnish a table and feed me of that thou hast ready. Because pretty much you're like, different than a slave in that house. Because you don't have the same rights that the actual people that live there, that own the place, have, even though you're an Israelite. It says, give place, thou stranger, to an honorable man. My brother cometh to be lodged, and I have need of mine house. So you could be an Israelite from a different tribe, staying with a particular Israelite. And then when the room that you're staying in, if somebody from their family comes, you have to step down somewhere else. Sleep on the couch or sleep in the barn or whatever the case was. You see? Because that person that's coming, that's a part of their inheritance. And that's how Jake gets down. These things are grievous to a man of understanding. The upbraiding of house room and reproaching of the lender. And this is why the Lord spoke about. Let's go back and read that again, and we'll come back to it. It says, Exodus 12 and 19, 7 days shall there be no leaven found in your houses. For whosoever eateth that which is leavened, even that soul shall be cut off from the congregation of Israel, whether he be a stranger or born in the land. Because these strangers, these Israelite foreigners, were not born in the land. So the ones that were born in the land treated them differently. And this is why you have the circumcision calling the other Israelites uncircumcision. Now you're starting to get the idea. Now you're starting to get the more of an understanding of it. And when we look up the word stranger, once again, is the word gar, which means sojourner, a temporary inhabitant, a newcomer lacking inherited rights. So they had rights as an Israelite, but not in that particular land, in that particular home. of foreigners in Israel, which are Israelite foreigners, through though conceded rights. And we read that conceded rights are to acknowledge, often reluctantly, as being true, just, or proper. All right, so they had a problem with that. Now, when we go to the root word of gar, is the word gawar, which means to sojourn, abide, dwell in, dwell with, remain, inhabit, be a stranger, be continuing, surely, to sojourn, dwell for a time, temporarily dwell, to seek hospitality with, which you just read a couple of scriptures on hospitality. You know, it says to assemble oneself. All right. So if you stayed with this particular person, you didn't have the same rights that they had in that home. So your voice will be very small, as we read in the book of Ecclesiastes, the 29th chapter. Now, let's go to Leviticus 25 and 35. It says, and if thy brother be waxen poor and fallen in decay with thee. Why? Because if he's poor, he's going to have to borrow. He's going to have to, be indebted to you. And this is why you had Hebrews that were slaves of other Hebrews. And they weren't supposed to treat them and manhandle them or treat them like a heathen and serve over them with rigor, because he's still your brother. He just fell in decay. You're supposed to help him out, and he's supposed to serve you until he has enough so he can go and be restored back. And this is why you had the law of redemption, where if your brother was in decay and he had to sell himself as a slave, you could come as his kinsman and redeem him. And this is why we read in the curses that all these things will come upon us, and no man shall redeem you, no man shall buy you. Pretty much there will be no one to help us. All right. It says, then thou shalt relieve him, yea, though he be a what? A stranger or a sojourner, that he may live with thee. So bottom line, either a stranger or sojourner. And this is your brother, an Israelite. Or how can an Israelite become a stranger? Very easy. But, these wacky-tacky Christians and others that try to go around that. So when we look up the word stranger, is what? Gar. Now, this word here, sojourner, this is another word that sometimes is used for a stranger, an actual stranger. But in this case, is used as someone that sojourns with you. Thawashab. All right? Sojourner, stranger. This is a Israelite that is a sojourner with you, but he doesn't have the same rights that you have in this home. So he would be like a foreigner. Beautiful, brother Pashai, Leviticus 25:47. And if a sojourner or stranger wax rich by thee, and thy brother that dwelleth in by him wax poor, and sell himself unto the stranger or sojourner by thee to the stock of the stranger's family, after that he is sold, he may be redeemed again. One of his brethren may redeem him. See, so that's the law of redemption. So this is an Israelite that becomes a stranger or a sojourner. All right, and this is all that is what we're reading in Exodus 12:19. That's what it's talking about, an Israelite stranger, an Israelite foreigner. Now, as we jump down to the 43rd verse, and the Lord said unto Moses and Aaron, this is the ordinance of the Passover. There shall no stranger eat thereof. So now, is this a contradiction? Or is it something where you have to have understanding? Because the 19th verse, right, says that, even that soul shall be cut off from the congregation of Israel, whether he be a stranger or born in the land, right? Now here in the 43rd verse, we're reading that no stranger shall eat thereof, right? But every man's servant that is bought for money, when thou hast circumcised him, then shall he eat thereof. A foreigner and an hired servant shall not eat thereof. In one house shall it be eaten. Thou shalt not carry forth of the flesh abroad out of the house, neither shall you break a bone thereof. All the congregation of Israel shall keep it. And when a stranger shall sojourn with thee, and will keep the Passover. So you see how it's seem like it's jumping back and forth. It's not a contradiction. It's just that you have to understand when it's speaking about the Israelite foreigners and when it's speaking about the actual nations. So now let's go here real quick, back up. And the Lord said unto Moses and Aaron, this is the ordinance of the Passover. There shall no stranger eat thereof. When we look up this word stranger here, right, the word stranger there is bun nakar. Now this is the words, the two words that I normally use to refer to an actual heathen. Bun is son and nakar is strange or stranger. But sometimes it can apply to the nation of Israel because the nation of Israel became foreign, just like in the case of Jeremiah the 2nd chapter, the strange vine of of a strange plant, such as in 1 Kings the 8th chapter, those strangers, that are not of thy people Israel, because they pretty much became castaways, But then in other cases, it's always speaking about the nations. All right. I mean, if it sounds confusing, I hope it's not. But so we read in here that the nation of Israel is supposed to keep the Passover. The stranger is not supposed to eat of the Passover. But every man's servant that is bought for money, because you had Israelites who had other Israelites as servants, when thou hast circumcised him, then he shall eat thereof. Why? Because he's an Israelite. A foreigner and an hired servant shall not eat thereof. See? And when we look up this word foreigner, thawashab, which is another name for a heathen. All right, sojourner, stranger. Yashab, to dwell, remain, sit. All right. Let's read on. Let's jump. In one house shall it be eaten. Thou shalt not carry forth aught of the flesh abroad out of the house, neither shall you break a bone thereof. All the congregation of Israel shall keep it, because only the Israelites are to keep the Passover. And when a stranger shall sojourn with thee, so when you have an Israelite that is foreign or strange to your home, to the land of Israel, when he keeps the Passover, let all his males be circumcised. Because one thing about Jake, when they went to foreign lands, after a while they stopped circumcising their children. That's where you get the Greeks, the Israelites that were Hellenized. They stopped circumcising their children because it was against the Greek laws back then. And then let him come near and keep it, and he shall be as one that is born in the land. Why? Because the reason why he was a stranger was because he wasn't born in that land, even though he's an Israelite. All right. It says, for no uncircumcised person shall eat thereof. Now, when we look up the word stranger here is what? Gar, sojourner. All right. Now, when we read down here in the 49th verse, which explains it, one law shall be to him that is homeborn, meaning born in that land, and unto the stranger or the Israelite foreigner that sojourneth among you. That's it. And this is why Ecclesiasticus 29 explains it perfectly. How, if you have a person, although he's an Israelite, that's staying with you, he doesn't have the same rights that you, your children, your wife, a brother that may be coming, or your pops may be coming to chill with you, for a week or whatever. So on and so forth, depending on, on the situation. Then this Israelite man would have to go sleep on the couch or sleep in the barn or whatever other commodity they had for him. You see? And that's what was going on in Israel. So that's why it says, one law shall be to him that is homeborn, and unto the stranger that sojourneth among you. So whether you had an Israelite born in the land or one that came from a foreign country. Just like in the case of Acts the 2nd chapter, where you had different Israelites coming from all different parts of the world to Jerusalem. They had to lodge somewhere. Because remember, after a while, the inns, the hotels and all that would be full. And they would have to lodge with other Israelites. And then it gives you the list of the different places where they were coming from. All right. So that's pretty much what that means in Exodus. So that is the law on the stranger that could eat the Passover. He's an Israelite foreigner that didn't have the same rights as one that was born in the land. And this is why we read again in Exodus 12:49. One law shall be to him that is homeborn, and unto the stranger that sojourneth among you. You see? So you had to have one of the main things that they had to be circumcised. And Jake, when they didn't come around like that, eventually what happened? They didn't circumcise themselves or their children, so on and so forth. You know. So I mean, I hope this lesson was edifying. I hope I didn't confuse any brothers, because it could get a little confusing, but it's really plain. It's really simple. It's not really that hard. Just like you have the Israelite foreigners, you have the natural nations, the natural heathen. And the natural heathen cannot eat of the Passover. But the Israelite heathen or the Israelite foreigner can, as long as they're circumcised. And that's pretty much what this is dealing with. All right, so with that, I pray that you brothers have been edified. And to the next time I say, Shalom.